In Dry Creek, a piece of paper meant more than a living soul. Late summer, 1877. The sun had not yet risen, but the dust already hung heavy in the air. Dry Creek sat silent under a copper sky, a town where justice was fast, loud, and rarely right. The gallows creaked in the center square, flanked by crooked beams and bitter whispers. A girl stood beneath the rope wrists, bound dress, torn face bruised, and neck already looped for the morning's convenience. Then thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves. A rider in a dust-gray coat burst into town like a bullet with purpose. He didn't come to ask questions. He came to stop the rope. They said she poisoned her boss. Said she emptied the safe, slipped out into the dark, and almost made it past the edge of town before someone caught her by the hem of her dress. They didn't need proof. Not in Dry Creek. Just enough whispers to turn into a shout. Just enough shouts to make a noose feel like law. Eliza stood on the gallows with the morning still cool on her skin. Her dress hung in tatters, clinging to her like the shame they'd sewn into it. Her left eye was swollen shut, and her wrists bled beneath the coarse rope that bound them. But she didn't cry. Not anymore. That had stopped after the third punch and the fifth accusation. Justice didn't live in Dry Creek. Only routine did. The preacher read from a cracked Bible with words no one was listening to. The sheriff chewed on a matchstick like it was just another Tuesday. And the townsfolk, well, they gathered like always, eyes wide, mouths tight, hoping for fire but settling for rope. She didn't scream. That unsettled them more than any plea would have. People don't like it when you accept the end without asking permission. Then came the sound. The hooves. Thunder cutting across silence. A black horse dust streaming from its heels like a warning. And on its back, him. Cain Graves. A name said quiet in most towns, and not said at all in others. A man with the kind of presence that made rifles feel heavier in your hands and lies dry out in your throat. He didn't slow down when he reached the gallows. He fired once into the sky. It stopped the world. "Get your hands off my wife," he said, like it was a promise to God himself. Nobody moved. Not even the wind. The sheriff blinked. Jasper stepped forward like he'd forgotten how boots worked. "Who the hell? I'm someone you don't want to test," Cain said, tossing a folded paper into the dust. The preacher bent to pick it up. Marriage certificate. Names clear. Ink still wet. The hangman backed away. Slowly. Cain climbed the steps, moved toward Eliza like he'd done it 100 times before. "You all right?" he asked, voice low, eyes locked on hers. She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Her legs gave out. He caught her, held her close like she mattered. And when the shot rang out from the crowd, he turned, fired, and the would-be shooter crumpled into the dirt before anyone else had time to blink. Cain didn't look back. He threw her onto the saddle, kicked the horse hard, and disappeared through the square, trailing dust and disbelief behind him. The rope swung empty in the breeze. Eliza was gone. Some folks still swear she was guilty. Others claim Cain married her on a lie just to save her from the noose. But if you were there, if you saw her face that morning, you'd know. Sometimes a man doesn't ride in to rescue the innocent. Sometimes he rides in because he's the only one who can see them. If you're still watching, I've got to ask, where are you tuning in from? Let us know in the comments, one dusty town to another. And if this story's got you leaning forward, just wait. The truth only starts once the rope stops swinging. Shall we keep going? Some men ride into town with songs on the wind. Cain rode in with silence. He didn't gallop. He didn't shout. He let the hooves do the talking, each one pounding out the same message. Too late to stop me. too early to try. Dry Creek had seen gunmen before, had seen outlaws, bounty hunters, and boys pretending to be both. But what came that morning wasn't a man riding for justice. It was a reckoning dressed in dust and steel. They say Cain hadn't stepped inside a church in over a decade, but he knew exactly when to interrupt a prayer. Right as the preacher lifted his hand toward the heavens, Cain lifted his revolver toward the sky. One shot, sharp, clean, final. It didn't ask permission. It rewrote the moment. "Get your hands off my wife." The crowd turned before the echo faded. The words rang louder than the gunshot. Some thought he was mad. Others thought he was bluffing. But Cain didn't care what they thought. He only cared about the woman with the bruised face and the broken silence. Eliza. He saw her up there, crumbling slowly behind the rope and splinters. And in that moment, Cain Graves didn't see a criminal. He saw someone who hadn't been given the decency of a question. Only a sentence. So he gave them all an answer. The marriage certificate, real enough to make liars of the whole town. The stare he gave the sheriff, real enough to make even the badge feel counterfeit. And when that first bullet cracked toward him from the edge of the square, Cain turned, drew, and dropped the man with a grace that looked like he'd done it in his sleep. Then came the escape. Eliza collapsed into him, not from weakness, from disbelief. Cain didn't cradle her like a savior. He held her like a man used to carrying broken things that still had value. He swung onto the saddle with one arm, guiding the horse through a storm of curses, dust, and rising gun smoke. They didn't get far before the shots started. Didn't matter. Cain didn't ride to outrun them. He rode to outlast them. Through alleys, dry creek beds, and jagged paths, only someone who'd memorized the land would dare take. He didn't look back, didn't speak. And the further he rode, the more the town behind him started to look like what it was, not a place of justice, just a place of rope and rumor. By the time the sun cleared the ridgeline, Cain had disappeared with Eliza into the canyons, swallowed whole by the land that raised him. And behind them, an empty noose, a dead man in the dirt. And a question left behind on every tongue in Dry Creek: who was that? But the truth is, Cain Graves isn't a name. It's a history carved into silence. A man with ghosts in his pockets, and bullets that always find their mark. And if you think the story ended when he rode away from the gallows, you're not listening close enough. Because the ride wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Still with us, if Cain's entrance made your heart skip, just wait. We're only 2 parts in, and things are about to get a whole lot more personal. Leave A in the comments if you've ever rooted for the wronged to outrun the rope. Let's keep riding one bullet. That's all it took to turn a hanging into a hunt. By the time Cain's horse cleared the last ridge beyond Dry Creek, the gallows behind them were empty, but the law wasn't far behind. Dust trailed in their wake like smoke from a fire, not fully put out. Eliza, broken and silent, was slumped against him, her body still trembling beneath the rough blanket he'd thrown over her. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just held on, not to him, but to something else, something that hadn't died when the rope tightened around her neck, a will to keep breathing. Cain didn't say much either. His jaw was clenched, his hands firm on the reins, and his eyes kept sweeping the horizon like it owed him something. He knew how this story played out. Not in courtrooms or church pews, but with rifles in the dark, and lawmen who shot first and wrote reports later. Still, he rode. Not because he had to, but because for the first time in a long time he'd made a choice that wasn't just about surviving. Near midday, they veered off the trail. Cain dismounted and dragged a second pair of boots behind him to confuse the tracks, then led the horse backward along a dry creek bed, his every motion a study in practiced disappearance. By the time the sun began to dip behind the hills, he'd found a shallow cave tucked into a ridge, cool and shadowed. Safe for now. He laid Eliza down, gently pulled the canteen from his saddlebag, and trickled water onto her cracked lips. She stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, still swollen but sharp beneath the bruises. "Where?" she croaked. "You're safe," he said, voice low and rough. "That's all that matters right now." She blinked at him, dazed, uncertain. "You shot a man." "Would have been two if I'd waited," he muttered, checking the chamber of his Winchester without meeting her gaze. "They weren't aiming to arrest you, Eliza. They were aiming to end it." She didn't respond, just stared at the flickering fire he'd built between them, her hands gripping the blanket like it was a lifeline. Her eyes said what her mouth didn't. "What kind of man does that for a stranger?" Cain didn't answer. Not out loud, but the truth hung in the air like smoke unspoken heavy. Later, when the canyon fell fully into night and the stars blinked open above them like silent witnesses, Eliza spoke again. "I didn't kill him," she said. Her voice cracked, but her words didn't waver. "I didn't take the money. I didn't poison anyone. But nobody in that town cared to ask." Cain looked up at her, his eyes shadowed by the firelight. "I know," he said simply. She studied him. "Why do you believe me?" He gave a tired shrug. "Because you didn't beg." Eliza flinched as if the memory of the rope brushing her neck still lingered. "I didn't beg because I knew it wouldn't matter." Cain nodded once. "Exactly." And in that single exchange, something shifted. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was close, a recognition of pain, of silence, of two people who had both been let down by the world and chose somehow not to let it break them completely. They weren't running together. Not yet. But they weren't running alone anymore either. Still following the trail with us, if Cain's bullet cost more than just gunpowder, if it bought back a piece of dignity, go ahead and hit like. And tell us in the comments, where are you tuning in from, partner? Because this ride is just getting started. Some truths aren't spoken until the fire's low and the silence presses hard. And some confessions only come after the blood dries and the chase cools. Eliza hadn't slept. Not really. She sat near the mouth of the cave, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight around herself, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything she'd survived in the last 24 hours. The bruises on her face were already starting to fade, but the ones inside hadn't even begun to darken. Cain sat across from her, back against the stone rifle laid across his lap like a habit he couldn't shake. His coat was unbuttoned, shirt dusted with grit, and that same unreadable calm hung around him like smoke, except his eyes. His eyes gave him away. They flickered toward her too often, stayed there too long. Eliza finally broke the silence. Her voice was quiet like a match struck in the dark. "You never asked if I was guilty." Cain didn't flinch. Didn't need to. "You knew I watched you for 12 days, he said, without looking away from the fire. "Saw how you carried yourself. How you looked folks in the eye even when they spat at you. Saw the burn scar on your hand when you helped that old man lift a barrel even when it split back open." Eliza's breath caught. 12 days, Cain nodded. "I was hired to kill you." The words hit like a shot through the ribs. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't sugarcoat it. Just said it like someone ordering coffee. Like it was a fact that had always lived between them, waiting to be named. "You..." Her voice cracked. She stopped, blinked hard. "You were going to kill me?" "Yes," Cain said. $500. Clean job. One bullet. No mess. Eliza stared at him, at the man who had dragged her from death's door, held her in the saddle, pressed water to her lips. "Why didn't you?" Cain's voice was low, steady. "Because when they dragged you through the crowd, you didn't cry." She blinked. "That's your reason." "It told me what I needed to know." He looked at her now full on. The guilty scream. They wail. They fight for a lie. But the innocent. He shook his head. They go quiet. Because they know there's no point yelling into a world that already made up its mind. Eliza turned away, hugging her knees tighter. The fire cracked between them. "Do you still have it?" she asked. The contract. Cain nodded once, reached into his coat and pulled out a yellowed folded paper. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. "Burn it," she whispered. Cain looked at her for a moment longer, then tossed it into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. No one spoke after that. Not for a long while. But when Eliza lay down that night, she didn't sleep with one eye open. And when Cain rolled his coat under her head as a pillow, she didn't flinch when his hand brushed her shoulder. Something between them had changed, not fixed, not solved, but shifted. She had a choice now, not between guilt and innocence, not even between trust and caution, but between running and staying. And in the stillness of the cave, where the fire burned low and the wind whispered against stone, she stayed. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can offer isn't a gun, it's the truth. Still watching. If Cain's confession stopped your breath for a second, go ahead and tap that like button. And share this story with someone who still believes redemption doesn't come easy in the West. Some places remember pain. And when you try to sleep there, the dirt itself whispers what almost was. The cave had grown quieter after Cain's confession. Not peaceful, just still, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what Eliza would do with the truth. But she hadn't run, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't touched the revolver he left out beside her, though the firelight glinted off its barrel all night long. Instead, when morning came, she was still there, still sitting, still breathing, still choosing. Cain stirred, first wincing, as the wound in his side pulled against the rough stitching. He caught her watching him from across the coals, her eyes softer now, but sharper too, like something inside her had burned clean through the night. "You look like hell," she said quietly. He managed a dry chuckle. "Feel worse." She poured him a bit of water from the canteen, held it to his lips. "Good. Means you're still alive." They didn't speak much that morning. There wasn't a need. The air between them was heavy with things unsaid, but understood: guilt, survival, trust, earned not by promises, but by blood, silence, and firelight. Eliza started moving first, cleaning, folding, organizing their sparse supplies. She found a flat rock and scrubbed the soot-blackened tin plates, humming low under her breath. It wasn't much, but it was the rhythm of someone trying to claim space in a place where death had nearly closed the door. Cain watched her from the corner of his eye. "You don't have to do all that," he murmured. "I know," she replied, "but I need to. I need to do something." And maybe that was the real truth of it. She wasn't trying to forget what had happened here. She was trying to prove that something could grow in the ashes of what almost was. By afternoon, she had even laid out a small fire circle outside the cave mouth, rebuilt with care. Stones arranged, wood stacked. It was a kind of defiance, not of Cain or Dry Creek or the men who hunted them, but of the voice in her own mind that still whispered, "You were meant to die here." Not today. Not yet. When Cain finally stepped out into the light, leaning on the cave wall, his face pale but stubborn, Eliza was there to steady him. He didn't say thank you. She didn't expect him to. That wasn't the kind of bond they had now. They ate quietly. Beans and hardtack warmed on the new fire. Cain's appetite was weak, but Eliza made sure he ate anyway. The smallest acts of care carried more weight than words. At sunset, Cain asked, "You really staying?" She didn't look at him, just poked the fire with a stick. "There's nowhere else that'd make more sense. We both almost died here. Might as well learn how to live in it." Cain looked at her then, not as a girl he saved or a target he missed, but as a woman who had chosen to stay where others would have run. A woman who wasn't just surviving the past, but reshaping it with calloused hands and quiet determination. Ashes didn't scare her. Not anymore. And for the first time in years, Cain let himself believe in something beyond just keeping breathing. Maybe this place, this strange stretch of dirt and rock and memory, could be more than a hiding spot. Maybe it could be a beginning. If you've ever had to start over in a place that nearly broke you, tell us below. Press 1 if this story hit you somewhere deep. Press 0 if it didn't, but you're still listening. Either way, you're part of the fire now, and we've still got a trail ahead. Some lessons come slow, like rain easing through dry ground. Others come fast, like the snap of a trigger and the weight of death landing at your feet. By the 6th day, Eliza no longer flinched at the sound of Cain's rifle. She'd watched him fire. Watched the stillness in his shoulders, the way he breathed before the shot, not like a killer, but like someone settling a score with the world, one bullet at a time. She didn't ask for a gun. He handed her one anyway. They were on a stretch of broken desert when the lesson began. Nothing but sun-baked stone and mesquite. The silence pressed in thick as heat. Cain stopped beside a half-fallen saguaro, opened his saddlebag, and pulled out a small Colt revolver. He didn't say much, just handed it to her butt first. She took it, her fingers curling around the grip. It was heavier than she expected. Cain pointed to a crooked stump about 30 feet ahead. "That's your enemy. Not a man, not a face. Just what might come through the dark when you least expect it." Eliza stared at it, her throat dry, feet apart, elbows loose. "Breathe." She did. "Now shoot." The crack of the gun echoed across the rocks. The bullet missed wide. She blinked hard, heart hammering. Cain didn't flinch. Again. Another shot. Closer this time. Her hands shook. Sweat dripped down her neck. Cain stepped behind her, not too close, but enough that his voice reached her ear. "Don't fight the fear. Let it sit beside you. But you hold the reins." Another breath. Another shot. This one nicked the edge of the stump. She exhaled sharp. "I hate this." "I know," he said. "Do it again." And she did. Later that night, they camped by a ridge where the wind moved like old ghosts. Cain sat cleaning his rifle, same way he always did, methodical, quiet, focused. Eliza sat cross-legged nearby the Colt, resting in her lap. "This thing," she said, not quite a question. "It's not who I am." "No," Cain replied. "But it might keep you breathing long enough to figure that out." She turned the revolver slowly in her hands. "Have you always known when to pull the trigger?" Cain's eyes flicked up, catching firelight. "No one does. You just learn to live with the sound after." That answer haunted her more than silence. The next day the test came. They were cresting a dune when Cain stopped short. Ahead, 3 men. Not bounty hunters. Worse. Eliza didn't know their names, but she recognized their kind. Leather coats, gold teeth, guns drawn. One smiled like he'd already counted the silver he'd get for dragging her back. Cain stepped forward, calm but unreadable. "We don't want trouble," he said. "You already brought it," the tallest one replied, drawing. The shot came fast, too fast. Cain dropped to one knee, returning fire. One man went down, another scrambled behind cover, but the third circled wide, closing in, gun raised, eyes locked on Cain's back. Eliza moved without thinking. Her fingers found the Colt arms rising, just as the man stepped into the open. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She just fired. The shot hit center chest. The man crumpled mid-step, a groan swallowed by dust. Cain turned, eyes wide, but not with surprise, with something closer to relief. She stood still, gun shaking in her hands. "I didn't aim," she whispered. "Yes, you did," Cain said, his voice low. "You aimed with everything that's ever tried to kill you." She fell to her knees, sobbing without sound. Not because she was weak, but because she finally understood the weight Cain had carried all along. Killing wasn't power. It was grief. Cain knelt beside her, touched her arm. "You saved my life," he said. She looked at him through tears, breath shallow. "No," she whispered. "I saved mine." The desert watched in silence as they buried the bodies and rode on. If you've ever had to make a choice that changed you forever, drop a comment below. This is more than a story. It's a scar shared in firelight. Some men draw their last breath in silence. Others never hear the fuse hiss before the world goes dark. By the time Cain collapsed, bleeding and breathless, they were already halfway into the hills, deep into the bones of a forgotten mining camp called Durham No. 7. The place smelled of rust and ghosts, the kind of scent that clung to your lungs and whispered of men who never made it back out. Eliza dragged him through the slatted entrance. He was barely conscious, his shirt soaked through with blood that wouldn't stop. She eased him onto a stack of rotted crates and pressed her hand to his wound. The heat under her palm made her stomach twist. "I told you," he muttered, barely audible. "You were supposed to run." She shook her head, fierce and trembling. "I did run. Straight to you." The world outside had gone quiet, too quiet. But Eliza had learned by now, when predators are closing in, they don't howl. They whisper. She moved fast. First she found the dynamite. 3 cracked sticks packed in a crate shoved behind old gear. Next, a coil of fuse buried in a rusted tin box. Old, fragile, but enough. Cain watched her through half-lidded eyes as she laid the plan out in silence. His lips moved, but no sound came. When she passed him the water canteen, he caught her wrist. "You don't have to do this," he rasped. "I know," she said softly, "but I'm not who I was." The shaft had one entrance. She would make sure that's all it had. The fuse stretched long, winding through the cracks like a snake waiting to strike. She left just enough of a trail for them to think it was easy. Then she sat cross-legged beside Cain, her fingers brushing his cheek. His fever burned high. His breath came slow. She pressed her forehead to his. "Don't die on me," she whispered. "Not now. Not like this." A moment later, the first voice echoed outside. Boots scraped gravel. "Check inside," someone ordered. "They're bleeding. He won't get far." Eliza didn't move. Her hand hovered over the matchbox like it was a Bible, and a bullet rolled into one. More voices now, closer, cautious. She waited until they crossed the threshold. 2, maybe 3 of them. She saw shadows stretching long and thin across the cave wall. Saw the glint of steel in one man's hand. Then she struck the match. It flared to life with a hiss and a glow that lit her face in orange and gold. She lowered it to the fuse, watched the fire catch and run. The sound of the burning line was like a warning sent straight to hell. They heard it too. What the boom! The earth didn't shake, it roared. Stone collapsed inward. Fire filled the shaft like a beast unleashed. Screams turned to dust before they ever finished. And just like that, the past was buried sealed behind flame and rubble. Silence returned, broken only by Cain's faint breath and the crackle of one last burning timber. Eliza stood panting, soot-smudged and shaking, but standing. She had counted her choices, and this was the one that let them both walk away. She knelt beside Cain, checked his pulse. Faint, but there. Still fighting, just like her. Outside, the stars had returned, blinking quietly above the scorched hills. She looked up at them and whispered that was for the girl who got strung up without a voice. And for the man who gave me mine back. If you've ever stood at the edge of something dark and chose to light a fire instead of backing down, let us know. This is Wild West Stories channel, where grit, gunpowder, and grace ride side by side. Some say the world ends with fire, but sometimes the world begins after it. When Cain opened his eyes, morning had already crept into the ruined mine like a quiet prayer. The dust hung heavy in the air, drifting in lazy beams of sunlight that pierced through a jagged crack in the collapsed shaft. The silence wasn't ominous anymore. It was sacred, earned. Eliza sat beside him, her knees pulled tight to her chest, her chin resting on bruised arms. Her face was smeared with ash and blood hair clinging to her cheek in wild strands. But her eyes were wide open, fixed on him, like she'd been watching every breath, measuring every rise and fall of his chest, to make sure he hadn't slipped away. He shifted slightly, and she startled. "You're awake," she breathed. "Wasn't sure," he rasped, voice cracked like old leather. "I wasn't either," she replied, tears threatening to rise again, though she fought them down. "But I told you to stay." "So you did." Cain managed the hint of a smile. "You always this bossy after blowing up a mine only on special occasions." They didn't laugh. Not really, but the tension loosened just enough for them both to exhale. Cain tried to sit up, groaning as pain bloomed sharp through his shoulder. Eliza rushed to his side, steadying him. "I stitched you again. You lost a lot of blood, but—" She hesitated, then added, "You didn't stop breathing. I stayed up all night listening." He looked at her, really looked. At the girl they tried to hang, who now sat like a warrior born of flame and ash. Her hands were scraped, her knuckles bruised, but her spine was straighter than ever. "You could have left," he said softly. "You left me boots, remember?" She reached into her satchel and pulled out the folded scrap of paper he'd left days ago. "If you run, at least do it comfortably." She unfolded it and held it between them. "I didn't run," she said, "and I'm not going to." Cain looked away, not out of shame, but because there were emotions under his skin he hadn't named in years. Regret, gratitude, something dangerously close to hope. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The breeze whistled low through the rocks, dragging with it the scent of scorched wood and cooled stone. But no voices, no footsteps. The bounty hunters were gone, buried beneath the rubble. Their past had burned behind them. Eliza stood and moved to the mine's entrance. She leaned against the broken beam and looked toward the horizon. It wasn't clear, not yet, but it wasn't full of death anymore. Behind her, Cain spoke, voice hoarse but steady. What now? She didn't turn, just kept her eyes on the sky. "We find a town where no one knows us. We start something that isn't built on blood or bounty. Maybe even build a place of our own." He shifted again, grimacing. "You really think we can outrun all this?" "No," she said, then smiled. "I think we can outlive it. And maybe that's the difference. If you've ever survived something that tried to end you, if you've ever looked at the ashes of what you once were and dared to start again, then maybe, just maybe, you know what this feels like. Drop A in the comments if you're still here, still breathing, still building. And if you think Eliza and Cain deserve peace, stay with us. The sun's just rising, and their story ain't done yet. You can outrun a posse. You can outshoot a bounty. But can you ever outrun who you used to be? The town of Loretto sat low and sun-drenched near the southern border, small enough to forget your name but just big enough to start over. And on the edge of its dusty main street, under a crooked mesquite tree, stood Elie's Café. The paint was chipped, the porch boards creaked, but inside there was warmth, coffee, laughter, and two people building something from the wreckage of their former lives. Cain no longer carried his rifle everywhere. His hands, once calloused from blood and grit, now built shelves and shuttered windows. Eliza baked bread in the mornings, served coffee by noon, and hummed a song Cain didn't recognize but wanted to learn. They didn't speak of Dry Creek, or the mine, or the names on Cain's old ledger. But the past, it always comes knocking. One afternoon, just as Eliza was wiping flour from her hands, the bell above the cafe door jingled. A man stepped in, tall, dust-stained, face like a blade dulled by travel, and in his hand a folded piece of paper. Wanted. Cain Graves. Cain stood from behind the counter. Eliza didn't flinch. She just stepped between them and said, "That man doesn't live here anymore." The stranger paused, read her face, then slowly nodded, turned, and walked out into the sun. Have you ever had to face the shadow of who you were, just to prove who you are now? They never spoke much about what came before. Not the gallows, not the gunfire, not the paper with her name and a price. But every morning Eliza poured Cain his coffee just the way he liked, black hot, no questions. And every evening he bolted the cafe door with the quiet certainty of a man who had once walked into fire and now guarded peace like it was a living thing. Their love wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was in the way she stitched the tear in his old coat without saying a word, in the way he fixed the squeaky back step before she even noticed it had broken. It was in the way neither of them flinched when silence stretched long, because now, silence meant safety. Cain had once been a shadow men feared. Eliza had once been a name on a rope. Now he was the man who watered the garden she planted. She was the woman who made the place he could finally rest his bones. Not all scars need explaining. Not all stories need retelling. Sometimes healing looks like two people sitting on a porch at dusk, no past, no bounty, just a breath shared under a quiet sky. If this story sat heavy in your chest, if it whispered something true about love found in the ashes, leave A in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, or subscribe for more Western tales where love is hard-earned and peace is the biggest risk of all. We'll see you at the next sunset.